Goodmorning BSN, being an initiative of Business School Netherlands, Hofstede Insights, and is sponsored by Chin Global, is aiming to give you some practical insights every Tuesday morning that you can use immediately after you start working again, and hopefully in between us stopping this show and you getting back to your work, you'll have some time to get a cup of coffee and think over what we've spoken about. Today's topic is all about team resilience, and then especially team resilience during a market turndown, a market downturn, I must say. And that's part of, let's say, the 4 pillars that we think are really important to create leadership within Business School Netherlands. We've got 2 people speaking today. The first one is Professor Dr. Toni Sfirtsis. He is, among a lot of other things, Associate Professor of Business School Netherlands. And as a reflector, we've got Marco van der Pol. He's the Program and Portfolio Manager at BrainBoss. I hope both gentlemen will introduce themselves a bit further when they start doing their presentations or reflections. Like told, we're going to end this meeting at 8:57 sharp. So that gives us let's say a couple of minutes after the presentations have been done to ask your questions. You can put your questions into the chat box as we go along, and I will pick them up afterwards. Or you can just raise your hand, the hand you've got within this Zoom meeting, so I can see who wants to ask a question, and I will give him the word to that. So Toni is going to introduce his presentation, and it's on how to build organizations that are truly adaptable at their core when going through difficult times. Yeah? So that's basically what it is. And 2 teams are touched by that, and the one is agility and the other one is resilience. Toni, please.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everybody. Is my sound good? Is it good to... Yes, very good. Well, my name is Toni Sfirtsis. We concluded together with Twan, almost 20 years a member of the BSN family. And my own background is strategy and innovation. And besides BSN, also an academic director at TIAS, the business school. And half of my time, I'm also a practitioner as a consultant, where I actually help organizations with a very fundamental basic question that is actually, why am I relevant today for my relevant stakeholders, clients, and so on, and why am I in 5 years still relevant for those parties? That implies actually 2 things. That the one is to do your things at the very best at this moment, but also exploring towards the future, what makes you in the future still relevant for those parties or customers, citizens, clients, and so on. I like to combine those things. And one of the things that when the question was, let's talk about resilience in teams during this type of time that we live in, I thought, well, teams constitute of people, and teams are not actually a vacuum. Teams are always part of an organization. So I broadened a little bit more the subject in terms of resilience without agility is not possible. And the other one is just looking at teams without looking at organizations in the whole is not possible. Before I go a little bit more in depth on that subject, and I always have too much slides, but let's try to do that in 15 minutes. Let me share a couple of what I call starting points, how I look at this type of subjects. The first one is, I think that most of the organizations nowadays are actually not suitable to cope with what we call VUCA world, that volatile, unprecedented, complex, and ambiguous world. Most of the organizations are actually not suitable or not ready to cope with that. I'm going to go there later on. The other one is, most of organizations are actually not human-centered in terms of how can I cope with all those externalities without coping what drives really people inside organizations. That's the second one. The third one is that no one inside organizations want to be managed in the way they are managed till today. Who wants to be managed in the way they are managed till today? That old classical way of managing and actually delegating things. A human being is not made to be managed. I'm coming to that later on. And last but not least, and a very important one that a lot of people inside organizations, behavior that you're managing on. And in a lot of organizations, we see the wrong KPIs, we see the wrong way of managing or stimulating people or create the right context where people can use their talents, their capabilities to give their own contribution as an added value to the results and the long-term viability of the organization. Very important one. You get the behavior that you're managing on. Well, take that for granted as a kind of, hey, that's a kind of extreme way how this guy looks at this. And the last one, and that's one that Twan will like, is I think most of the organizations are in the wrong way structured and organized because most of the organizations organize functions, departments, people, but actually something that I somewhere in time learned from Twan is you organize work as first. How is the work organized? And then you come up with departments, process steps, and so on and so on. Well, that's how I look at things. And let's try to, in a kind of race of 15 or 20 slides in 15 minutes or 30 minutes, try to share some insights from my own background in terms of as a researcher, but also as a practitioner, because I want to end this presentation with a case, a Volkswagen case. So let's try to share my screen, and I think I do this one. Should I do it in a presentation mode first before I share it, Arthur? Yes, like this.
So you can share just a part of your screen.
Yeah, wait a minute. Let's go there. Share. And I take this one or this one. Maybe we can do it like this.
Looking great.
Does it look great like this?
Well, yeah, just switch to presentation mode now.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Switch to full screen.
Very good. Well,
Yeah. Perfect.
Twan already posed the question, how do we build organizations that are truly adaptable? And the term adaptability is actually something that comes from, if you look at the strategic literature, that comes from the combination of being innovative, being agile, and being resilient. Because I already mentioned, being resilient without agility is not possible. These are two different types of concepts. And we see in businesses or in organizations, especially the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years, almost everyone talks actually about agility. And they use the word in a very wrong way. And let me tease you a little bit on that. Most of them, and that thing of agility comes from the IT business, where they talk about agile working and where they think that the whole organization should be agile. That's bullshit. The whole organization is not possible to be agile. The whole organization, maybe they use some type of working forms like sprints, like squads, and using some terms like product owners, but that's not the way you make an organization agile and resilient. So if we combine them, we should actually look at the combination of both two and talk about adaptability. And especially nowadays, is adaptability a crucial, actually a competence and a mindset of an organization. So if I try to combine them in a very, well, and try to define that, what's the difference between those two things? Well, agility is actually the ability of an organization to move very quickly and easily. I always show that in a kind of this type of movement. This is agility. And you talk about resilience, that's actually the capacity of a system to absorb disturbance, as a kind of absorptive capacity, and still capable of returning to its basic function, structure, and feedback systems. I call that's resilience. Every time coming to kind of balance, back again, and agility is this. But we need them both. And we need them both, and I'm going later on why we need them both when we talk about adaptive organizations. So if you combine them, I would actually say it's the competence of an organization who is capable of combining stability and flexibility. Let's be honest, no organization is continuously in a flex mode. No organization is continuously in stability mode because somewhere in time they become obsolete. So we need them both. We need to be flexible and we need to be stable. And I'm coming to that later on. How do we build these two things inside the same organization? Because actually being flexible and being stable are two different types of what I call competences or learning mechanisms. And before we do that, let's go very quick to sort of what are those enemies of adaptability, what we see nowadays in organizations. And some of them are maybe kind of open door, but just to be actually, to share them with you. Yeah, hierarchy, sure. Every one of us knows the more layers, the more silos, the less adaptable an organization is. And we see also in a lot of organizations managing by fear. Don't let people take the initiative, try new things out, because otherwise, if they make mistakes, they could be actually managed not in a proper way and not granted for that. Because we always say, try new things out. Experimentation is very, very important when we talk about adaptability, learning, innovativeness. Decision bias. We see it also in organizations that a lot of things that we use, we define them not in a consistent way. Let me illustrate with a very simple example. The board says, hey, we must become the most customer-centric organization in our market. If we talk with each of the board members, each of them actually defines it in a different way. Well, you know what happens then downwards, when each of the board members defines it in a different way, what happens there downwards? Very blur, and most of the people are time spending in, hey, kind of mutual sense making. What do we mean with customer centricity? Instead that we actually define it in a consistent, unique, together way, mutual sense making. Well, habit. We need habits because it gives us some type of predictability. It gives us some type of safety in terms of how we make decisions. But somewhere we can also become a little bit obsolete, or as I call it, kind of myopia, that you have some blind spots because of that habit, because of all these routines that you have built in organizations. Do we need them? Yes, but watch out that it doesn't go too far with that. Well, centralization, open door. The more centralized things are in terms of decision making, the less adaptable an organization is. Inflexible business practices, well, we have some of them. IT, quality systems, HR systems, and so on. We need them, yes, we need them, but they don't make it very easily to change things and to become flexible. Legislation is also one of them. Rigid structures, that's a very interesting one. You see in different businesses and markets, for example, the construction industry or the banking industry, that all these organizations have a kind of mental model how a construction company should be organized or how a bank should be organized and governed. And I say, wait a minute, different organizations, different background, different heritage, different history. How is it possible then that you all copy each other? When we talk about the governance model, we talk about the structure, and that type of rigids, I call them mental models, are actually influencing the way we manage organizations that doesn't make us adaptable. Skills deficit, we see that in a lot of businesses. For example, take data scientists. You want to make the next leap, you want to become more flexible, we need different types of competencies. And some of those are not available, or we should invest in them. It takes too long before we go there to make the next leap as an organization. Well, the discussion about short-term thinking, long-term thinking, well, that's a personal one, and that's a personal one. It's my personal opinion. I think that an organization should look at long-term, but there are also evidences, and especially with shareholder value, where companies also can, let's say, perform well with a short-term thinking in terms of from quarter to quarter to quarter. So that's a very personal one. Insufficient experimentation, that's a very important one to remember, that an organization needs what I call slack, fat. If you want to experiment, if you want to become more flexible, more agile, more resilient, you need people to give them the space to try new things out, to learn, to innovate. If you don't have the slack, how do we want to do that? And what we see is in the previous 10 years, during all these crises, the only thing that managers can do is actually rationalize cost cutting, back to the bone, talk about lean and mean. And I said, well, where's the slack then when markets become again very positive? Do you have there the slack to grab those opportunities and to try those new things out? No way. Lack of diversity, and that's for me nothing else than managing diversity is much more complex than all the same type of employees that you hire, because diversity gives you tension. You have to manage the tension, but tension gives creativity, gives innovativeness, and finally also that adaptability. The last one, maybe the most important one, is actually the kind of purpose. And with purpose, we don't mean their kind of, let's say, Zen type of thinking. Purpose is nothing else than, do employees really feel that they are important, that they are relevant for the organization? Because otherwise, how do you get them committed? And let's be honest, most of the organizations are built not on, let's say, trust and the competency of their people. They're actually organized based on distrust. And that's why we get all these layers, check, double check, double check, double check. Well, 12 of these enemies that actually inhibit us to become adaptable as an organization. So we have the current times, and we need also to be very busy with the new times. And this balance in the strategic management literature, we call that ambidexterity. That's a very difficult word, but actually what we call that, as I define that, the basic problem confronting organizations to engage in sufficient exploitation, that's the current time, to ensure the current viability, and at the same time to devote enough energy to exploration. So somewhere we need to do both and exploit things, optimizing them, becoming more efficient, becoming better at what you do, and on the other way, become innovative and exploring the future and trying to translate those things to the current business. In most of the case, what we see is that this is structurally divided in departments. We have a department innovation, we have a department business development, and department strategy and innovation, and we have the core business like production, logistics, sales. Can you imagine the, let's say, the tension between these people who are very innovative and long-term thinking and trying to translate their ideas, their minimum viable products to the line, where the line says, actually, hey, wait a minute, this first quarter, I don't have the time here, I don't have the capacity to do this type of, well, let's say, long-term thinking. But it's very essential to organize these two things in the same organization, because otherwise you become obsessed. And as most consultants always say, it's a matrix, and right there up, it's the best position to have. We have to explore and we have to exploit. Because if you only exploit it, just optimizing things, becoming more efficient, you get somewhere in time obsolete because of that arrogance of success. The other way is, there are a lot of organizations with very much ideas, very creative. Well, I call it a kind of intellectual hobbyism without earning any type of money. So we need them both. That's the first part from the strategical management literature when we want to build up that agility and resiliency. But there's also another one, what we see, and that's from an organizational and sociological perspective and change perspective. More and more, we actually start to conclude that organizations are not human-centered. We don't look at what really drives people inside organizations, build those organizations around human beings. And more, we start to conclude that organizations should be actually organized and should be looked at as a kind of organism. Let me explain what I mean with that. And what we see in management literature, but also in scientific research, it's called that movement and the new way of thinking about management organizations called humanocracy. I'm not going to define them all, but I can actually advise you all, please, if you don't have read that book, please read it. It's from Hamel and from Gary Hamel, from Hamel and Pralat. Gary Hamel has written a book, it's called Humanocracy. Very interesting book in terms of how to look towards the future and how future organizations should be managed and should be organized. Well, a couple of things that comes there back every time again and again is, if you create ownership with your employees, you don't need to manage them. The second one is, try to copy your organization and the way it's structured and governed based on the market dynamisms. Try to, let's say, reward people based on their competencies and based on their added value to the organization, not based on their rank, not based on their position, but based on their role and contribution and added value. Every human being wants to be part of something. So we need to talk more and more about communities of people with the same affinities, with the same competences, same talents, instead of talking about departments. You see there, for example, that we more and more talk about competencies and roles and contributions and not anymore about functions. That comes from this type of thinking. Openness. That's a very interesting one, because most of us are not raised to have a kind of dialogue when we talk about some type of issue. We try to convince the other one of our own, let's say, hey, I'm right and you're not. Dialogue as a competence is very difficult, but be open for all these ideas of your colleagues and try there in dialogue to come to kind of what I call synthesis. That's a different type of having meetings and trying to create new things instead of trying to convince your colleagues of your own right. Already talked about that, experimentation. And the other one is create a context where people are actually not continuously talking about either or, but there are a lot of opportunities in terms of both in the end. Well, if you, and I'm not going to discuss these ones, but Twan, we are going to share these slides, I don't know, yes, sir?
We are about to have to end your presentation, Tony. So you've got like a minute left.
A minute?
Yeah.
A minute? My goodness. Shall I go? Because let me go to the case. But give me 3 minutes. May I, Twan?
Yep, go ahead.
Good. Because all these things, guys, is not new, eh? If you try to combine them, look at this thing. This Agile Manifesto Deming from Plan, Do, Act, Check. Take half a minute to read this, and I'm going to illustrate this with a case from a very big car producer. Let's go to, let's say, Volkswagen. Volkswagen came to us and they say, well, we need to create adaptability, innovativeness, agility, resilience as a kind of cultural thing, as a kind of competence, as a kind of mindset. And we started to talk to them, well, and they said every employee should actually have the freedom to participate in all these type of experiments, projects, pilots, and so on. We said, well, the first thing is everyone is like by Google, everyone has the right to opt in. If he does that, and that's a kind of arbitrary one, how many time of his time is he actually facilitated to participate in one of these strategic projects, these exploration projects? Well, at Volkswagen, they said 50% of the time for maximum of 3 months. And let's go a little bit to the process of this one to take you there step by step. Volkswagen, based on their exploration activities and research, they define every 2-3 years, they define strategic projects. We see here 2 lines. The above line is the exploration one, and the below line is the exploitation one. At step 1, there's a team formed for a specific project with maximum 5 to 7 people, cross-functional, cross-hierarchical. Before they started the project, they write a 1-pager where they actually define by themselves what their role and contribution could be in that project. That's their commitment. When the team has formed 5 to 7 people, they also write a 1-pager together where they will stand in 3 months, because this project team exists for 3 months. During that process, if one of the participants doesn't actually perform as he committed, the project team has their, how do I say that? That they actually send this one outside the project team. They have the responsibility and the accountability to do that. After those 3 months, we have 2 weeks where the next team has come, where they were interested in that project and say, I can contribute there, I can have a role and contribution here, and I think I could be relevant based on my experience, expertise, and relevance and affinity. And we see the same type of process again. The participant has two responsibilities. The one is he communicates with his own department or his own colleagues about the progression. And the other one is, during the process, if we see there quick wins that could be deployed or implemented in his own department or in his own process, that employee has the responsibility to do that. So you see here, every 3 months, a new participation of new members, the same project, we actually scaling up here, and we go to the next step, That's for the creativity and the completeness of solutions, very good. But it has also two additional advantages. People are actually getting connected with people where they never cooperated with. They get their actually the tension of different perspectives because it's cross-functional, cross-hierarchical. And you have here also the network effect that people afterwards learn each other, can fight each other when you talk about cooperation inside the organization. If you repeat this for every type of strategic project, and that's happening inside Volkswagen, this has become a competence based on all these previous principles that we talked about. And this has become, so we exploit, that's the fundamental part, your primary process, your management process, and so on, your IT processes. And from those departments and processes, people are participating in the exploration of the thing. So the tension is very natural managed on a very individual level.
Thank you so much, Tony. That was very clear, informing. And I would like to ask Marco van der Poel to reflect upon your presentation. Marco, can you?
Yes.
There you are. Yeah.
Thank you,
That's Marco. Hi, Marco.
Hi. So Tony, I think it's wonderful, and I think we can use a couple of more hours to listen to.
Yeah, sure.
Very inspiring. Let me introduce myself briefly. I'm a principal consultant within BrainBoss, responsible for change, and I've been dealing with change for most of my professional career, so over 25 years already. It's always about executing change in the organization. How do you make that possible? And that's what I'm doing with BrainBoss, seeing how we can increase execution power in change for organizations. Listening to the presentation of Tony and the things that we want to achieve, you see that change is more and more active in our organizations, and it's become something which we have to deal with in a continuous way. And to execute that, we need to be very, very transparent in our goals and visions and strategy on how we want to deal with that change. I think that sometimes that's not being clear enough, and not all people understand. And one of the things Tony pointed out was the conversation and dialogue, which need to be part. And I think we discuss that part, what's our vision, what's our goal, not enough. Discussion is also looking at different sides of the mirror, you might say, to really understand what we want to achieve rather than taking it for granted. And with that becomes a bit of transparency. Leaders often have a second agenda or a different thinking about things, and we need to be clear and transparent to really have that discussion and really understand what we want to achieve. Only from there, then we can get people acting on their own and assuring that we're moving in the right direction. So transparency, communication, it's really important in this setup. What also helps for me, it's getting a clear roadmap. And the roadmap keeps us focused on that dot on the horizon, getting really into the long-term action while we also have a good understanding on the short-term actions. With those short-term actions, we need to experiment. really understand what we want to do. Is it feasible? What can we do? Come up with creative solutions to make that next step. In that feedback, in that experimenting, a feedback cycle is crucial, I think. Really connecting the dots, really getting direct feedback on a short term. So don't make those experiments too big. Don't make those steps in the short-term action plans too big, because it will not drive the business as you want to. Also in decision making, it's also that dialogue of really understanding the decision which lays in front of you. Not having the right discussion on the decisions will lead to, well, let's say, unclear thinking and making wrong decisions only for the benefit of making the decision rather than doing the right action in your business. And to get the right decision, you need to have a clarity on where you are, what you do, and having that transparency before you make that decision. So I think really the agility and resilience, to build that up, you need to be communicating, getting people to understand, because only after that, then you can get people to act on their own and start up their actions in the right direction. I think that's the essence of what I took out of the presentation of Toni.
May I have a quick reaction on what Marco said to Ton?
Sure.
Thank you, Marco, for that, because all these relevant additions that you make, because it's too short time, and you know that, I know that in 10 minutes or 15 minutes, but what you actually pronounce here and very make it clear is you have to manage it as a change process. If you don't do that, it's not going to happen. And that's a very important message also for Marco. It is a change process. If you try to do it like a waterfall, like implementing software or something like that, forget that. It's really, and thank you for your additional reflections, Marco. Yes, it's a change process, really. Tom.
Thank you, Marco. I was on mute before, but I was thanking you for your reflection. People in the audience, are there any questions to either Toni or Marco? Please raise your hands or put it in the chat. And I will go through the couple of screens that I've got, looking if people have raised their hands. I see a question from Larry Jones. Please go ahead, Larry.
Good morning, Toni. Good morning. I enjoyed the presentation, and I just wanted to clarify one thing about stability, which I think was the enemies of adaptability. I beg your pardon. Enemies of adaptability. Does culture have impact on that as well? Cultural background, does it have impact on how to adapt to situations?
Yeah. Yes. It's a very full yes. And that cultural thing has its impact in the type of interventions that you do in creating this, because we went too fast through the presentation and it's a short time. My key message also is, don't think that the whole organization should be agile, flexible, or resilient. That's not possible. You have the fundamental, and that's your primary process, your managerial process, your IT processes. That's the real daily business that goes on and on. That's optimized. And based on that, you build actually what I call project-based, issue-driven, based on strategic issues. You build their teams who are going to pick up that project, that pilot, that experiment, and go with that. So you build the flexibility and agility, resilience on the backbone, what I call there the fundamental. The way you do that and the type of interventions you do there is really dependable from the type of culture that you have. Really.
Okay.
And yeah.
Okay, George Woods, you have a question, I think.
Good morning, and thank you. It was really good presentation. I was just intrigued at the concept of Slack and how many organizations don't apply this. and yet it makes complete sense. So thank you for that. And then the other one was decision bias. How many organizations are wired to particular decision bias? So thank you for those reminders.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank
Do
you.
you want to have some figures about how many organizations do we really manage on Slack? Well, there is always, and not to go too broad on that, and maybe let me use just a very simple but illustrative example. Let's take, for example, consultancy business. Management consultants should be, for example, billable for 70 or 80% of the time. And the 20% is really Slack, but that Slack is never managed. If you look at consultancies, hey, I have my target here, 80% of my billable time, or the amount of turnover, that's the amount of hours. The 20%. So when you try to innovate with this type of organization, the first thing that they say is, we don't have the time here. Wait a minute, let's have a look. And we see they're 80% productive. The 20%, all right, let's take the half of that is for socializing, for some meal, for coffee drinking with colleagues. The 10% is actually a half day a week per person that we can actually deploy really in relevant projects for the development of the organization. Or so we never managed Slack. That's one part of the thing that, manage it and define it. What is that? Where is that Slack? And the other one is a lot of organizations try to be so efficient in terms of cost cutting that they don't have any Slack. And that's also a pity when they say, well, wait a minute, you have a problem there. Yeah. Thank you for the question, Tron. Yeah.
Thank you. Frodo Korf, I saw you waving. Is that a question coming up? Or?
Yeah. My reading glasses. Can you elaborate a bit more on humanocracy? Yeah.
Put it in the chat.
You're forgetting the question of Yolanda Brink.
Oh, sorry. Shall we? Let's start with Yolanda. Yeah. The topic is team resilience during market downturn. Can you speak towards that downturn because the Slack will be gone? If I may, and that's maybe very extreme, what I'm going to say to you, that it's an organization doesn't have to restructure if they are organized in a proper way when there's a downturn. Can you follow me on that?
I can follow the English, but I'm not sure if I understand, because I'm definitely now in an organization where there is a big downturn, and it does require, unfortunately, some laying off. So Slack is gone.
Yeah.
And building that adaptability and that resilience that you're talking about is very much needed. So I was just curious, because I think it was all really interesting, and I've been writing, and so definitely some really good points there. But that specific downturn that is there, while everybody's working their butt off, but the downturn is there. If you can maybe just speak a little bit.
The downturn could be actually initiated by the market himself or by customers, or that's one thing. So the first one is, were we ready enough or anticipative enough to see the downturn before it came? That's one thing. But that's a reflective question that the board should ask themselves. In most of the cases, when we try to say, we start to let layers off, or let's say people, then you're actually too late. It's too harsh to say that like that, but actually you're too late. So there is no Slack. No, there is no Slack. But to do this downturn, to let layers off or people, that was my point also, that's not the proper way to do that. And it starts with a basic one, and that is, please organize work. Because how do we do that? And sorry to be a little bit too broad and give me half a minute. Do you know how organizations develop in time? That's actually, hey, there's a problem out, or let me put it like this one. If it becomes more complex outside, we become more complicated inside the organization. Hey, is there an issue? let's try to define a function. There is another issue, let's put up a department. And so we have there a lot of this type of elements that we put on the organization's kind of, well, let's say, heavyweight thing without thinking about it. What is it about? What's the job to be done? Instead of every time that there is an issue, we put there. So it's
clear, Tony. So very clear.
Interesting.
We've gone through our time, unfortunately. We could talk about this subject for like a couple of hours more, like
Oh,
Mark
sure.
mentioned. But
Sure.
for now, we have to end the session. We've passed our time actually by a couple of minutes. So
May I react 1/2 minute on that of Solomon? Half a minute.
10 seconds. Huh?
Well, 10 seconds. The basic of humanocracy is actually what really drives people inside organizations. That's research from more than 50 years. And all these research, meta research, came up to 3 basic things. What drives people inside organizations? The first one is autonomy. Give people the freedom to make their own choice how they organize their work. The second one is growth, professionally and personally inside organizations. Give them a perspective. And the third one, already discussed, is purpose. Let people feel that they are relevant and that they really contribute to the overall achievement of the objectives of the organization. Point.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Marco. Thank you all for joining in.
Thank you, guys. Thank
Next
you.
week, next week we will be back again with Gerard Eckhart, who is joining in today as well. And we will start sharp at 8:50 next week again, and the week after that, and the week after that. For now, it's a big thanks to you all, and please enjoy your working day, and hope to see you next week. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.